March 2019. The entire town of Copper Ridge gathered outside the courthouse, some laughing, others shaking their heads in disbelief as Wade Brennan, the town's most eligible bachelor and third-generation cattle rancher, stood hand in hand with Eliza Hart, the reclusive woman they'd nicknamed the Crazy Cat Lady, who lived in that run-down Victorian with at least 40 felines. 6 months later, when catastrophe struck Wade's 800-acre ranch and left him on the brink of losing everything his grandfather built, those same townspeople watched in stunned silence as Eliza's army of cats did something no one could have predicted. But how could 40 house cats possibly save a failing cattle ranch? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Wade Brennan had never been the type to care what people thought. Growing up on the Brennan Ranch, 5 miles outside Copper Ridge, Montana, he'd learned early that ranching meant long days, calloused hands, and a stubborn refusal to quit when things got hard. His grandfather, Clayton Brennan, had homesteaded the land in 1947, and his father, Marcus, had expanded it to 800 acres of prime cattle country. Now, at 34, Wade was the sole keeper of that legacy. The town knew him as reliable, hard-working, and painfully single. Every Sunday at Millie's Diner, the local matchmakers would nudge their daughters or nieces in his direction. Wade would tip his hat politely, pay for his coffee, and head back to the ranch. He wasn't being rude, he simply hadn't met anyone who understood the life he'd chosen. That changed on a Tuesday afternoon in September 2018. Wade had driven into town to pick up feed from Hartley Supply when he noticed a commotion outside the old Victorian house on Maple Street. A crowd had gathered, and he could hear Margaret Peterson's shrill voice carrying across the crowds. "It's absolutely unsanitary. There must be health code violations." Wade parked his truck and walked closer. The Victorian had been empty for years until someone bought it last spring. He'd heard rumors about the new owner, but had been too busy with calving season to pay attention to town gossip. "Someone needs to call animal control," another voice chimed in. It was Derek Masterson, who owned the hardware store and had opinions about everything. Wade pushed through the small crowd and saw what had caused the fuss. A slender woman in her early 30s stood on the porch, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wore paint-splattered overalls and held a calico cat in her arms. Behind her, through the open door, Wade could see at least a dozen more cats lounging in various spots. "I have every legal right to care for these animals," the woman said quietly but firmly. "They're all healthy, vaccinated, and properly registered with the county. I have the paperwork if anyone would like to see it." "It's not natural," Margaret continued. "No normal person lives with that many cats." The woman's jaw tightened, but she didn't raise her voice. "What's not natural is abandoning animals to starve. Every cat here was rescued from the streets or shelters. I'm giving them a home." Wade found himself speaking before he'd planned to. "Seems to me she's not breaking any laws. Maybe we should let her be." The crowd turned to look at him. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Wade Brennan, you can't possibly think this is acceptable?" He shrugged. "I think people should mind their own business, unless someone's being hurt." "Are those cats being hurt, ma'am?" The woman met his eyes for the first time, and Wade noticed they were an unusual shade of amber, almost golden in the afternoon light. "No, sir. They're very well cared for." "Then I reckon that settles it." Wade tipped his hat to her and walked back to his truck, ignoring the whispers that followed him. He didn't think much about the encounter until 2 weeks later, when his truck broke down on Route 7, 3 miles from town. It was past sunset, his phone was dead, and he'd started the long walk back when headlights appeared behind him. An old Subaru pulled up, and the passenger window rolled down. It was the woman from the Victorian house. "Need a ride?" she asked. Wade hesitated for only a moment before accepting. The interior of her car was surprisingly clean, with just one cat, a gray tabby sitting in a carrier in the back seat. "I'm Eliza Hart," she said as she drove. "I wanted to thank you for what you said the other day. Most people in this town have already decided who I am without talking to me. Wade Brennan. And I meant what I said. People ought to mind their business." They drove in comfortable silence for a minute before Eliza spoke again. "You're the rancher, right? I've seen your property from the Ridge Road. It's beautiful land. Been in my family for 3 generations. You're new to Copper Ridge? Moved here in April. I needed a fresh start, somewhere quiet where I could focus on my work and take care of my rescues." She glanced at him. "I restore antique furniture and sell it online. That's how I afford to feed 42 cats." Wade let out a low whistle. 42? The gossips are saying 40. Eliza smiled for the first time, and Wade noticed it transformed her entire face. "I adopted 2 more last week. Brothers, found behind the grain elevator. They would have died if someone hadn't heard them crying." She dropped him at the ranch entrance, refusing his offer of gas money. As her taillights disappeared down the road, Wade realized he'd enjoyed those 15 minutes more than any of the forced conversations at church socials. Over the following months, Wade found himself driving past Maple Street more often than necessary. Sometimes he'd see Eliza in her yard, working on a piece of furniture or playing with her cats in the enclosed garden she'd built. They'd wave, exchange a few words, and he'd continue on his way. It wasn't until December, during the first real snowstorm of winter, that things shifted. Wade had been in town picking up supplies when he saw Eliza's Subaru stuck in a snowdrift outside the veterinary clinic. She was trying to push it free while juggling a cat carrier, clearly frustrated. "Let me help," Wade said, approaching quickly. Together they freed the car, and Wade noticed her hands were shaking not from cold, but from distress. "What's wrong?" "It's Oliver, one of my oldest cats. He's having trouble breathing. Dr. Simmons is examining him now. But," her voice cracked, "I've had Oliver for 9 years. He was the first cat I ever rescued." Wade didn't think twice. "Come on, I'll wait with you." They sat in the veterinary waiting room for 2 hours. Eliza told him about finding Oliver as a kitten in a dumpster behind her college dorm in Seattle, how he'd gotten her through graduate school and a difficult breakup. Wade told her about losing his father to a heart attack 5 years ago, how the ranch felt emptier now even though nothing physical had changed. When Dr. Simmons finally emerged with good news, Oliver had asthma but would recover with medication. Eliza burst into tears of relief. Without thinking, Wade pulled her into a hug. That night, he drove her and Oliver home, carrying the cat carrier inside for her. The Victorian's interior surprised him. Despite housing 42 cats, it was immaculately clean and thoughtfully organized. Cat trees reached toward high ceilings, scratching posts occupied corners, and feeding stations were set up in the large kitchen. The furniture was beautiful, clearly Eliza's own restoration work. The cats themselves were calm and healthy, some approaching Wade curiously, while others observed from their perches. "You've built something special here," Wade said honestly. "This isn't what people think it is. I know what people think. Crazy cat lady, recluse, probably has 15 dead cats in the walls." Eliza's voice was bitter. "I moved here to escape that kind of judgment, but I guess it follows you everywhere." "Not everywhere," Wade said. "Some of us can see what's actually in front of us." Their friendship grew naturally from there. Wade would stop by with fresh milk from his dairy cows, and Eliza would send him home with baked goods. She taught him about furniture restoration, and he showed her the basics of ranch management. The town noticed, of course, and the gossip intensified. "Wade Brennan's lost his mind," he heard someone say at the feed store. First sign of loneliness, I suppose. He's been alone too long. But Wade had never felt less lonely. Eliza understood what it meant to be dedicated to something others didn't value. Her cats weren't just pets, they were creatures she'd saved from death or misery, and she'd built her entire life around giving them quality care. He respected that kind of commitment. On a clear February evening, Wade asked Eliza to dinner at the one nice restaurant Copper Ridge had, Giuseppe's Italian place on Main Street. She said yes. The date was perfect. They talked for hours, discovering shared interests beyond their obvious dedication to their respective callings. Both loved classic Western films, preferred reading to television, and had complicated relationships with their families who didn't understand their life choices. When Wade kissed her goodnight on her porch, surrounded by the curious gazes of several cats watching through the window, he knew something fundamental had shifted in his world. 3 months later, in May 2019, Wade proposed, not with fanfare or public spectacle, but on a quiet afternoon at the ranch, overlooking the pasture where his cattle grazed. Eliza said yes, without hesitation. The engagement announcement hit Copper Ridge like a tornado. At Millie's diner, the breakfast crowd buzzed with shocked reactions. He's actually going to marry her? Someone asked loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. Poor Wade, Margaret Peterson said, shaking her head. He's clearly having some kind of crisis. Someone should talk sense into him. Derek Masterson was more blunt. That woman's not right in the head. Mark my words, this won't end well. Even Wade's own ranch hands, good men who'd worked for his family for years, expressed concern. Boss, are you sure about this? His foreman, Jimmy Castillo, asked carefully. The town's saying things. Let them talk, Wade replied. I'm sure. The wedding was scheduled for late June at the courthouse, with a small reception at the ranch afterward. Wade's mother flew in from Arizona, clearly uncomfortable, but trying to be supportive. Eliza's younger sister came from Portland, the only family member who'd stayed in regular contact. The day before the wedding, Wade sat on his porch and thought about what he was doing. He'd lived his entire life in Copper Ridge, had built his reputation as a solid, dependable rancher. Marrying Eliza would make him an object of ridicule, at least for a while. The town would never let them forget this. But when he thought about Eliza, her quiet strength, her compassion for helpless creatures, the way she made him laugh, how she saw ranching not as a backward lifestyle but as honorable work, none of the gossip mattered. The 28th of June 2019 arrived warm and sunny. Wade stood at the courthouse in his best suit, his hands sweating slightly as the judge began the ceremony. Eliza wore a simple cream-colored dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she'd never looked more beautiful. Outside, a crowd had gathered, not to celebrate, but to witness the spectacle. Wade could hear their murmurs through the open windows. Can't believe he's going through with it. Give it 6 months. He'll realize his mistake. Those cats will probably destroy his ranch house. When the judge pronounced them married, Wade kissed his wife and heard scattered laughter from outside. Eliza's hand tightened in his, and he squeezed back reassuringly. At the ranch reception, attendance was sparse. Jimmy and a few ranch hands came, along with Dr. Simmons and his wife, who'd always treated Eliza kindly. Most of Copper Ridge stayed away. We don't need them, Eliza said quietly as they stood together, watching the sunset over the pasture. We have each other, and that's enough. Wade pulled her close. More than enough. What neither of them knew was that 6 months later, those 42 cats, the very creatures the town had mocked, would become the difference between losing everything and saving the Brennan legacy. But that crisis was still ahead, waiting in the cold Montana winter. For now, Wade and Eliza were simply two people who'd found each other despite the judgment of others, ready to build a life together on land that had sustained 3 generations of Brennans. The ranch stretched out before them, 800 acres of possibility, and Wade felt more optimistic about the future than he had in years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The first few weeks of married life brought adjustments neither Wade nor Eliza had fully anticipated. The ranch house, built by Wade's grandfather in 1952, had always been a masculine space, functional, sparse, with little thought given to comfort or aesthetics. Eliza's Victorian had been warm and filled with life, every corner purposeful. Combining their worlds required negotiation. "I'm not bringing all 42 cats to the ranch," Eliza said one evening in July as they discussed the logistics. "That wouldn't be fair to you or them. This is cattle country, and some of my cats have never been around large animals." Wade had been prepared to accommodate all of them, so her practicality surprised him. "What are you thinking?" "I'd like to bring 12. The ones who are more adaptable, who might actually enjoy having barn space, to explore. The others can stay at the Victorian Isle, converted into a proper sanctuary. I can drive over daily to care for them." They settled on 13 cats, making the move to the ranch. Eliza chose carefully, younger cats who were curious and confident, plus Oliver, her asthmatic senior cat, who she couldn't bear to be separated from. The Victorian would house the remaining 29, with Eliza visiting twice daily. The ranch hands were skeptical when the cats arrived. Jimmy watched from the barn as Eliza unloaded carriers, his expression neutral but doubtful. "They gonna be in the house, boss?" he asked Wade. "Some will. Others might prefer the barn, if that's all right." "Eliza thinks they'll help with the mouse problem," Jimmy grunted. "We'll see." What happened over the next month surprised everyone, including Eliza. The cats adapted remarkably well. 3 of them, a orange tabby named Rusty, a black cat called Midnight, and a gray and white female named Patches, took to the barn immediately. They established territories in the loft and began hunting with impressive efficiency. Within 2 weeks, the mouse population that had been raiding feed bags dropped dramatically. "I'll be damned," Jimmy said one morning, watching Rusty proudly carrying a mouse across the barn floor. "These cats actually work." The other ranch hands began coming around too. Carlos Martinez, who handled most of the cattle feeding, started leaving out water bowls for the barn cats. Even Skip Thompson, the oldest hand who'd worked for Wade's father, began sneaking treats to Patches. In the house, the remaining 10 cats brought an unexpected warmth. Wade had lived alone since his father's death, and the house had felt like a museum of memories frozen, quiet, untouched. Now, life flowed through every room. A cat napping in the sunny kitchen window, another perched on the back of the couch, Oliver following Eliza from room to room as she worked on furniture pieces she'd brought from the Victorian. Eliza transformed the ranch house's spare bedroom into her workshop. The smell of wood stain and varnish mixed with the ever-present scent of coffee that Wade always had brewing. She'd wake before dawn with him, make breakfast while he prepared for the day's work, then settle into restoration projects while managing her sanctuary visits. Their routine found its rhythm. Wade would spend days moving cattle, mending fences, managing the complex choreography of running 800 acres. Eliza would split her time between the ranch and the Victorian, her furniture business thriving through her online shop. Evenings, they'd sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, cats arranged around them in various poses of contentment. The town's attitude remained unchanged. When Wade and Eliza went to Copper Ridge together, conversations would stop. Eyes would follow them. At Millie's diner, other patrons would whisper just loud enough to be heard. Heard she's keeping 30 cats at that old house. Probably a fire hazard. Wade looks tired. She's probably keeping him up all night with those animals. Eliza handled it with dignity, but Wade could see it hurt her. She'd moved to Copper Ridge hoping for a fresh start, and instead, she'd found the same judgment that had followed her from Seattle. "They'll come around," Wade told her one night in August. "Will they?" Eliza asked, her voice small. "Or have I just made your life harder?" Wade pulled her close. "You've made my life better. That's all that matters." But privately, he worried. The ranch operated on relationships with feed suppliers, veterinarians, equipment dealers, the livestock auction house in Billings. If Copper Ridge's business owners decided to make things difficult because of his marriage, it could impact operations. His concerns proved valid in September. Wade needed a significant equipment repair. His hay baler had broken down during the crucial haying season. Normally, he'd call Masterson's Hardware, which handled equipment repairs and had always given the Brennan Ranch priority service. Derek Masterson answered the phone himself. "Brennan Ranch, what can I do for you?" "Derek, it's Wade. My hay baler's down. I need your repair team out here as soon as possible." There was a long pause. "We're pretty backed up right now, Wade. Might be 2-3 weeks before we can get to you." Wade's jaw tightened. "Derek, it's September. I have 300 acres of hay that needs to be baled before the weather turns. You know that. Like I said, we're backed up. Maybe your wife's cats can help with the baling." Derek's voice carried barely concealed amusement. Wade hung up without responding. He called a repair service in Billings. Instead, they charged more and took 2 days to arrive. But they fixed the problem. The delay cost him, though. He lost a full cutting of hay in the north pasture when rain moved in unexpectedly. Similar incidents followed. The veterinarian, who'd always done house calls for cattle checkups, suddenly required Wade to trailer animals into town. The feed store, where the Brennan Ranch had an account for 3 generations, implemented a new payment upfront policy that applied only to Wade. Even the livestock auction house in Billings, where Wade sold his cattle each fall, seemed less enthusiastic about his business. "They're punishing you because of me," Eliza said in October, after Wade explained why their feed costs had suddenly increased. "They're being small-minded," Wade corrected. "It'll pass." But it didn't pass. And as autumn deepened into winter, Wade began seeing real impacts on the ranch's bottom line. The financial cushion his father had maintained was shrinking. Equipment repairs were more expensive. Feed costs had increased. Several business relationships his family had relied on for decades were fraying. Jimmy noticed, too. "Boss, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but the men are worried. Word around town is that you're having trouble with suppliers." "We're managing," Wade said, though he knew Jimmy could see the strain. Eliza threw herself into her furniture business, working longer hours, taking on more projects. Her online shop was successful. She had steady customers across the country, but it couldn't offset the increased costs the ranch was facing. The first real snow came in early November, unusually early even for Montana. Wade stood at the kitchen window watching it fall, calculating hay supplies and winter feed costs. The numbers were tighter than they'd ever been. Eliza came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking? That winter's going to be long this year." She rested her head against his back. "We'll get through it." Wade turned to face her. "I don't regret marrying you. I need you to know that." "I know. I don't regret it either, despite everything." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The cats are happy, at least. That's something." It was true. The 13 ranch cats had thrived. The barn cats, now 5, as 2 more from the Victorian had transitioned to barn life, had proven so effective at pest control that Carlos had started calling them the barn crew. they'd prevented what would have been thousands of dollars in unsight feed loss from rodent damage. The house cats brought comfort on increasingly stressful days. Wade found himself appreciating their presence more than he'd expected. Oliver, Eliza's asthmatic senior cat, would sit beside Wade in the evenings while he did ranch paperwork, purring softly. There was something grounding about it, a reminder that not everything in life was about profit margins and business relationships. December brought deeper cold and deeper financial concerns. Wade sat with his accountant, Frank Morrison, who'd driven out from Billings to review the ranch's books. "You're not in immediate danger," Frank said, "but the trajectory isn't good. Your costs are up 18% from last year, and your cattle prices at auction were down. You're burning through reserves. How long do we have? At this rate, 12 to 18 months before you'd need to consider selling land or taking on significant debt." Frank closed his laptop. "What happened, Wade?" "Your father ran this ranch at a profit for 30 years. Wade explained the situation, the changed business relationships, the increased costs, the town's attitude since his marriage. Frank shook his head in disgust. "That's no way to treat someone. The Brennan Ranch has been good for this region's economy for decades." He paused. "I'd recommend diversifying your supplier relationships. Don't rely on Copper Ridge businesses anymore. It'll mean more driving, higher transportation costs in the short term, but you need reliable partners." After Frank left, Wade made a list of alternative suppliers, everything from feed to equipment to veterinary services. All of them were farther away, in Billings or beyond. The logistical challenges were significant, but Frank was right. He couldn't depend on Copper Ridge anymore. Eliza found him at the kitchen table that night, surrounded by paperwork and catalogs from distant suppliers. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. Wade considered lying, protecting her from the stress, but that wasn't the kind of marriage he wanted. "Not critical yet, but heading that direction if things don't change." She sat down across from him. "What if I sold the Victorian? The sanctuary could operate from here, and the money from the house." "No," Wade's voice was firm. "That's your dream, your work. We're not sacrificing that. But if it means saving the ranch, we'll find another way." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Your sanctuary helps animals that would otherwise die. That matters. We'll figure this out together." What neither of them knew was that in just a few weeks, a crisis would hit that would make their current problems seem manageable. The real test of their marriage and the unexpected value of Eliza's 42 cats was approaching with the new year. For now, they sat together at the kitchen table, hands clasped, while snow fell steadily outside and the cats dozed peacefully around them, unaware of the challenges their humans faced. Christmas came quietly. Wade's mother called but didn't visit. Eliza's sister sent gifts but had work obligations. They spent the holiday alone on the ranch, just the two of them and the cats, and somehow that felt right. "This is my favorite Christmas ever," Eliza said on Christmas morning, curled up next to Wade on the couch while a fire crackled in the fireplace. "Even with everything else going on, especially with everything else going on, because I'm not alone anymore." She kissed him softly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Wade held her close, watching snow continue to pile up outside, and tried to push away the worried feeling that had settled in his chest. Winter was deepening, and with it, the sense that something difficult was coming, something that would test everything they'd built together. The cats sensed it too. Oliver, usually calm, had been restless for days. The barn cats were staying closer to the buildings instead of ranging widely as they usually did. Animals always knew when change was coming. Wade just hoped they'd be ready for whatever that change turned out to be. January 2020 arrived with brutal cold. Montana winters were always harsh, but this one felt particularly unforgiving. Temperatures dropped to 15 below zero, and the wind came howling down from Canada with a vengeance that made every outdoor task an ordeal. Wade woke at 4:30 each morning to break ice on water troughs and check cattle. The herd needed constant monitoring in these conditions. Frostbite, hypothermia, and calving complications could happen quickly. His hands were perpetually chapped despite the heavy gloves, and exhaustion had become his baseline state. Eliza adjusted her schedule to match his needs. She consolidated her sanctuary visits to once daily, spending mornings at the Victorian before returning to help Wade with afternoon chores. The cats at both locations seemed to sense the severity of the weather and stayed close to heat sources. On January 15th, Wade's foreman Jimmy arrived at dawn with concerning news. "Boss, we've got a fence down in the northeast section. Looks like a tree came down in the wind last night. Took out about 40 feet of fencing." Wade swore under his breath. The northeast section bordered federal land. If cattle wandered through that gap, rounding them up in this weather would be dangerous and time-consuming. "Get Carlos and Skip. We need that fixed today before the herd finds it." They spent 8 hours in sub-zero temperatures repairing the fence. Wade's fingers went numb twice, and Skip nearly got frostbite on his left ear. By the time they finished, it was dark, and Wade could barely feel his feet. Eliza had hot soup waiting when he stumbled into the house. She helped him out of his frozen layers, wrapped him in blankets, and sat him by the fire. Oliver immediately climbed into his lap, the cat's warmth and purring somehow reaching through the cold that had settled deep in Wade's bones. "This winter's trying to kill us," Wade said, his voice hoarse. "But it won't succeed," Eliza replied firmly, handing him a mug of soup. "We're tougher than the weather." Wade wanted to believe her, but the stress was accumulating. The fence repair had required materials from Billings, another unexpected expense. His equipment was taking a beating from the cold, and repairs were constant. The cattle needed extra feed to maintain body heat, draining supplies faster than anticipated. Then, on January 23rd, disaster struck in a way Wade had never imagined. He was in the barn doing evening checks when his phone rang. It was Sheriff Tom Bradley from Copper Ridge. "Wade, you need to get to town. There's been an incident at your wife's property." Wade's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident? Is Eliza hurt?" "She's fine, but there's been a fire." The Victorian. Fire department's on scene now. Wade's truck fishtailed on ice as he raced toward town, his heart hammering. Eliza had gone to the Victorian 4 hours ago for evening feeding. She should have been back by now. He saw the smoke before he reached Maple Street, thick black columns rising into the twilight sky. Fire trucks blocked the road, their lights painting the snow red and blue. Neighbors stood in clusters, watching. Wade abandoned his truck and ran toward the house. A firefighter tried to stop him, but he pushed past until he saw Eliza sitting in an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, her face streaked with soot. "Eliza!" He reached her in seconds, pulling her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, but her voice was shaking. "Wade, the cats, I couldn't get them all out. I tried, but the smoke was too thick, and the firefighters wouldn't let me go back." She broke down, sobbing, and Wade held her while firefighters continued battling the blaze. The Victorian, that beautiful old house she'd restored with such care, was being consumed by flames. Fire Chief Dan Rawlings approached them an hour later, his face grim. "We've got it contained, but the structure's a total loss. The whole interior is destroyed." "What caused it?" Wade asked. "Too early to say for certain. Looks like it started in the basement. Could be electrical. Old houses like this, the wiring's often not up to code." Rawlings glanced at Eliza sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan, we did everything we could. The cats, Eliza whispered. Did any of them? Rawlings shook his head. We found several deceased in the structure. I can't give you an exact count until the fire investigator does his work tomorrow. Eliza made a sound like she'd been punched. Wade held her tighter, feeling utterly helpless. They stayed until the fire was completely out, until the Victorian was nothing but a smoking ruin. Neighbors who'd once gossiped about the crazy cat lady now stood watching in uncomfortable silence. Some looked genuinely sympathetic. Others seemed almost satisfied, as if the fire was somehow cosmic justice. Margaret Peterson stood on the sidewalk with Derek Masterson, speaking in voices just loud enough to carry, "Well, that's what happens when you keep that many animals in one place. It's a wonder the whole block didn't go up." Wade started toward them, anger flooding through him, but Eliza grabbed his arm. "Don't. It doesn't matter what they think. Nothing matters, except," her voice broke, "I killed them, Wade. Those cats trusted me, and I let them die. This wasn't your fault. You heard the fire chief, it was electrical." But Eliza wasn't listening. She was staring at the ruins of her sanctuary, her life's work reduced to ashes and charred wood. They drove back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, the 13 cats who lived there greeted them as usual, rubbing against legs, meowing for dinner, completely unaware of the tragedy that had befallen their companions. Eliza stood in the kitchen, surrounded by cats, and started counting aloud. 29 were at the Victorian era. 29 cats who depended on me. Over the next 2 days, as the fire investigator did his work, the full scope of the disaster became clear. 17 cats had perished in the fire. 12 had somehow escaped. Neighbors reported seeing cats fleeing the burning building, scattered in all directions across town. Eliza spent every daylight hour searching Copper Ridge for survivors. Wade joined her whenever he could spare time from ranch duties. They checked under porches, in garages, behind dumpsters. The town watched their desperate search with mixed reactions. Some offered help, but many more viewed it as confirmation of Eliza's instability. "It's core, just cats," someone said at Millie's diner within Wade's hearing. "She's acting like children died." Wade had to physically restrain himself from responding. To Eliza, those cats were children, helpless creatures she'd rescued from death, given safety and love. Their loss was devastating. By January 28th, they'd found 9 of the missing cats. 3 were never recovered, presumably having fled too far or perished from the cold. 29 cats had lived at the Victorian. Now, only 9 survivors remained, traumatized and needing extensive veterinary care for smoke inhalation. The financial impact hit like a second disaster. The Victorian had insurance, but the policy would take weeks to process. In the meantime, Wade had unexpected costs, veterinary bills for 9 traumatized cats, the need to house and care for them at the ranch, and the loss of Eliza's workshop space. Eliza moved her furniture business operations to the ranch's garage, but working there in January was nearly impossible. The space wasn't insulated, and heating it would cost more than they could spare. Her income stream, which had been helping offset ranch expenses, ground to a halt. "I should get a job in town," Eliza said one evening in early February. "Something with steady income. Maybe the library, or who in Copper Ridge would hire you?" Wade asked gently. "You know how they feel." It was a harsh truth, but a truth nonetheless. The fire had only reinforced the town's view of Eliza as someone whose choices led to disaster. Wade's accountant called on February 10th with news he'd been dreading. "The ranch is in serious trouble, Wade. With the additional expenses from the fire, the increased feed costs, and the loss of Eliza's income, you're now operating at a significant monthly loss." "How long do we have?" 4 months, maybe 5, before you'll need to make hard decisions. Selling land, liquidating cattle, possibly even selling the entire ranch. After the call, Wade sat alone, in his truck, parked on a ridge, overlooking the property his grandfather had homesteaded. 73 years of Brennan family history, and he might be the one to lose it. Not because he was a bad rancher, but because he'd married a woman the town disapproved of. He thought about his father, about his grandfather. They'd survived droughts, harsh winters, market crashes, and disease outbreaks. They'd been tough men who never quit. What would they think of him now, contemplating the possibility of failure? When he returned to the house, Eliza was in the kitchen, surrounded by cats, 22 now, as they'd integrated the Victorian survivors. She was crying softly, trying to hide it, but her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Wade knelt beside her. "Tell me, I've ruined your life," she whispered. "Your ranch, your reputation, everything. You should have married someone normal, someone the town would accept, not a woman with 42 cats and more problems than sense." "I married exactly who I wanted to marry," Wade said firmly. "This isn't your fault. The fire wasn't your fault. The town's attitude isn't your fault. And we're going to find a way through this. How? We're running out of money, out of options. I don't know yet. But we'll figure it out." He wiped her tears with his thumb. "Together, remember?" But privately, as February wore on, Wade's optimism was fading. The ranch was hemorrhaging money. Spring was coming, which meant calving season, more expenses, more labor, more stress on systems that were already strained. The cats, at least, continued to thrive. The original barn crew of 5 had now grown to 8, as 3 of the Victorian survivors proved better suited to barn life. They patrolled the property with impressive dedication, and the rodent population remained virtually non-existent. Carlos mentioned that they'd prevented at least 3 different attempts by rats to nest in the feed storage area. "Those cats are worth their weight in gold for pest control," Jimmy said one afternoon. "I never thought I'd say it, but your wife's animals are actually helping this ranch." It was small consolation against the larger financial picture, but Wade noted it. The cats were pulling their weight, at least. On February 28th, Wade received a letter from the county assessor. Property taxes were due in 60 days, $18,000, that he didn't have readily available. It would require dipping into the emergency fund that was supposed to carry them through spring. He showed Eliza the letter that evening. She read it in silence, then looked up with determined eyes. "I'm selling my equipment, all my restoration tools, my supplies. There's a market for quality furniture restoration equipment. I can probably get 10,000. That's your livelihood. The ranch is our home, your family's legacy. My tools can be replaced eventually. The Brennan Ranch can't." Her voice was steady now, the decision made. "We do whatever it takes." That night, as they lay in bed with cats draped across the blankets, Wade stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how they'd survive the next 4 months. Every solution he could think of involved sacrifice selling cattle before they were ready, taking on debt with predatory interest rates, or the unthinkable option of selling land. He didn't know that the real crisis was still ahead, didn't know that in less than a month, something would happen that would threaten not just the ranch's finances, but the lives of his entire herd. And he couldn't imagine that when that moment came, the salvation he needed would come from the most unlikely source imaginable. The cats slept peacefully around them, unaware that soon they would prove themselves to be far more than just pets, or even pest control. Soon they would become heroes, in a way no one, least of all the people of Copper Ridge, could have predicted. But that moment was still ahead, waiting in the warming days of early spring, when a crisis would strike with devastating swiftness, and the true value of Eliza's 42 cats would finally be revealed. January 2020 arrived with brutal cold. Montana winters were always harsh, but this one felt particularly unforgiving. Temperatures dropped to 15 below zero, and the wind came howling down from Canada with a vengeance that made every outdoor task an ordeal. Wade woke at 4:30 each morning to break ice on water troughs and check cattle. The herd needed constant monitoring in these conditions. Frostbite, hypothermia, and calving complications could happen quickly. His hands were perpetually chapped despite the heavy gloves, and exhaustion had become his baseline state. Eliza adjusted her schedule to match his needs. She consolidated her sanctuary visits to once daily, spending mornings at the Victorian before returning to help Wade with afternoon chores. The cats at both locations seemed to sense the severity of the weather and stayed close to heat sources. On January 15th, Wade's foreman Jimmy arrived at dawn with concerning news. "Boss, we've got a fence down in the northeast section. Looks like a tree came down in the wind last night, took out about 40 feet of fencing." Wade swore under his breath. The northeast section bordered federal land. If cattle wandered through that gap, rounding them up in this weather would be dangerous and time-consuming. "Get Carlos and Skip. We need that fixed today, before the herd finds it." They spent 8 hours in sub-zero temperatures repairing the fence. Wade's fingers went numb twice, and Skip nearly got frostbite on his left ear. By the time they finished, it was dark, and Wade could barely feel his feet. Eliza had hot soup waiting when he stumbled into the house. She helped him out of his frozen layers, wrapped him in blankets, and sat him by the fire. Oliver immediately climbed into his lap, the cat's warmth and purring somehow reaching through the cold that had settled deep in Wade's bones. "This winter's trying to kill us," Wade said, his voice hoarse. "But it won't succeed," Eliza replied firmly, handing him a mug of soup. "We're tougher than the weather." Wade wanted to believe her, but the stress was accumulating. The fence repair had required materials from Billings, another unexpected expense. His equipment was taking a beating from the cold, and repairs were constant. The cattle needed extra feed to maintain body heat, draining supplies faster than anticipated. Then, on January 23rd, disaster struck in a way Wade had never imagined. He was in the barn doing evening checks when his phone rang. It was Sheriff Tom Bradley from Copper Ridge. "Wade, you need to get to town. There's been an incident at your wife's property." Wade's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident? Is Eliza hurt?" "She's fine, but there's been a fire. The Victorian. Fire department's on scene now." Wade's truck fishtailed on ice as he raced toward town, his heart hammering. Eliza had gone to the Victorian 4 hours ago for evening feeding. She should have been back by now. He saw the smoke before he reached Maple Street, thick, black columns rising into the twilight sky. Fire trucks blocked the road, their lights painting the snow red and blue. Neighbors stood in clusters, watching. Wade abandoned his truck and ran toward the house. A firefighter tried to stop him, but he pushed past until he saw Eliza sitting in an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, her face streaked with soot. "Eliza!" He reached her in seconds, pulling her into his arms. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said, but her voice was shaking. "Wade, the cats, I couldn't get them all out. I tried, but the smoke was too thick, and the firefighters wouldn't let me go back." She broke down, sobbing, and Wade held her while firefighters continued battling the blaze. The Victorian, that beautiful old house she'd restored with such care, was being consumed by flames. Fire Chief Dan Rawlings approached them an hour later, his face grim. "We've got it contained, but the structure's a total loss. The whole interior is destroyed." "What caused it?" Wade asked. "Too early to say for certain. Looks like it started in the basement. Could be electrical old houses like this. The wiring's often not up to code." Rawlings glanced at Eliza sympathetically. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan. We did everything we could." "The cats," Eliza whispered. "Did any of them?" Rawlings shook his head. "We found several deceased in the structure. I can't give you an exact count until the fire investigator does his work tomorrow." Eliza made a sound like she'd been punched. Wade held her tighter, feeling utterly helpless. They stayed until the fire was completely out, until the Victorian was nothing but a smoking ruin. Neighbors who'd once gossiped about the crazy cat lady now stood watching in uncomfortable silence. Some looked genuinely sympathetic. Others seemed almost satisfied, as if the fire was somehow cosmic justice. Margaret Peterson stood on the sidewalk with Derek Masterson, speaking in voices just loud enough to carry. "Well, that's what happens when you keep that many animals in one place. It's a wonder the whole block didn't go up." Wade started toward them, anger flooding through him, but Eliza grabbed his arm. "Don't. It doesn't matter what they think. Nothing matters except—" Her voice broke. "I killed them, Wade. Those cats trusted me, and I let them die. This wasn't your fault. You heard the fire chief, it was electrical." But Eliza wasn't listening. She was staring at the ruins of her sanctuary, her life's work reduced to ashes and charred wood. They drove back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, the 13 cats who lived there greeted them as usual, rubbing against legs, meowing for dinner, completely unaware of the tragedy that had befallen their companions. Eliza stood in the kitchen, surrounded by cats, and started counting aloud. 29 were at the point. Victorian. 29 cats who depended on me. Over the next 2 days, as the fire investigator did his work, the full scope of the disaster became clear. 17 cats had perished in the fire. 12 had somehow escaped. Neighbors reported seeing cats fleeing the burning building, scattered in all directions across town. Eliza spent every daylight hour searching Copper Ridge for survivors. Wade joined her whenever he could spare time from ranch duties. They checked under porches, in garages, behind dumpsters. The town watched their desperate search, with mixed reactions. Some offered help, but many more viewed it as confirmation of Eliza's instability. "It's just cats," someone said at Millie's diner within Wade's hearing. "She's acting like children died." Wade had to physically restrain himself from responding. To Eliza, those cats were children, helpless creatures she'd rescued from death, given safety and love. Their loss was devastating. By January 28th, they'd found 9 of the missing cats. 3 were never recovered, presumably having fled too far or perished from the cold. 29 cats had lived at the Victorian. Now, only 9 survivors remained, traumatized and needing extensive veterinary care for smoke inhalation. The financial impact hit like a second disaster. The Victorian had insurance, but the policy would take weeks to process. In the meantime, Wade had unexpected costs, veterinary bills for 9 traumatized cats, the need to house and care for them at the ranch, and the loss of Eliza's workshop space. Eliza moved her furniture business operations to the ranch's garage, but working there in January was nearly impossible. The space wasn't insulated, and heating it would cost more than they could spare. Her income stream, which had been helping offset ranch expenses, ground to a halt. "I should get a job in town," Eliza said one evening in early February. "Something with steady income. Maybe the library. Or who in Copper Ridge would hire you?" Wade asked gently. "You know how they feel." It was a harsh truth, but a truth nonetheless. The fire had only reinforced the town's view of Eliza as someone whose choices led to disaster. Wade's accountant called on February 10th with news he'd been dreading. "The ranch is in serious trouble, Wade. With the additional expenses from the fire, the increased feed costs, and the loss of Eliza's income, you're now operating at a significant monthly loss." "How long do we have?" 4 months, maybe 5, before you'll need to make hard decisions. Selling land, liquidating cattle, possibly even selling the entire ranch. After the call, Wade sat alone in his truck, parked on a ridge overlooking the property his grandfather had homesteaded. 73 years of Brennan family history, and he might be the one to lose it, not because he was a bad rancher, but because he'd married a woman the town disapproved of. He thought about his father, about his grandfather. They'd survived droughts, harsh winters, market crashes, and disease outbreaks. They'd been tough men who never quit. What would they think of him now, contemplating the possibility of failure? When he returned to the house, Eliza was in the kitchen, surrounded by cats, 22 now, as they'd integrated the Victorian survivors. She was crying softly, trying to hide it, but her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Wade knelt beside her. "Tell me, I've ruined your life," she whispered. "Your ranch, your reputation, everything. You should have married someone normal, someone the town would accept, not a woman with 42 cats and more problems than sense." "I married exactly who I wanted to marry," Wade said firmly. "This isn't your fault. The fire wasn't your fault. The town's attitude isn't your fault, and we're going to find a way through this." "How?" "We're running out of money, out of options. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out." He wiped her tears with his thumb. "Together, remember?" But privately, as February wore on, Wade's optimism was fading. The ranch was hemorrhaging money. Spring was coming, which meant calving season, more expenses, more labor, more stress on systems that were already strained. The cats, at least, continued to thrive. The original barn crew of 5 had now grown to 8, as 3 of the Victorian survivors proved better suited to barn life. They patrolled the property with impressive dedication, and the rodent population remained virtually non-existent. Carlos mentioned that they'd prevented at least 3 different attempts by rats to nest in the feed storage area. "Those cats are worth their weight in gold for pest control," Jimmy said one afternoon. "I never thought I'd say it, but your wife's animals are actually helping this ranch." It was small consolation against the larger financial picture, but Wade noted it. The cats were pulling their weight, at least. On February 28th, Wade received a letter from the county assessor. Property taxes were due in 60 days, $18,000 that he didn't have readily available. It would require dipping into the emergency fund that was supposed to carry them through spring. He showed Eliza the letter that evening. She read it in silence, then looked up with determined eyes. "I'm selling my equipment, all my restoration tools, my supplies. There's a market for quality furniture restoration equipment. I can probably get 10,000. That's your livelihood. The ranch is our home, your family's legacy. My tools can be replaced eventually. The Brennan Ranch can't." Her voice was steady now, the decision made. "We do whatever it takes." That night, as they lay in bed with cats draped across the blankets, Wade stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how they'd survive the next 4 months. Every solution he could think of involved sacrifice, selling cattle before they were ready, taking on debt with predatory interest rates, or the unthinkable option of selling land. He didn't know that the real crisis was still ahead. Didn't know that in less than a month, something would happen that would threaten not just the ranch's finances, but the lives of his entire herd. And he couldn't imagine that when that moment came, the salvation he needed would come from the most unlikely source imaginable. The cats slept peacefully around them, unaware that soon they would prove themselves to be far more than just pets or even pest control. Soon, they would become heroes in a way no one, least of all the people of Copper Ridge, could have predicted. But that moment was still ahead, waiting in the warming days of early spring, when crisis would strike with devastating swiftness, and the true value of Eliza's 42 cats would finally be revealed. The video Wade had captured on his phone was shaky and dark, but unmistakable. Even in the poor lighting, you could see the line of cats facing the forest, see the wolves' glowing eyes, watch as the cats held their ground while massive predators retreated. Wade hadn't planned to share it publicly. He'd recorded it for his own records, evidence in case Fish and Wildlife needed documentation. But Jimmy had asked to see the footage, then Carlos, then Skip. Before Wade realized what was happening, someone had posted it to a ranching forum online. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 50,000 times. Comments flooded in from ranchers across Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. Most were skeptical, obviously staged, or fake video. Wolves wouldn't retreat from cats. But some ranchers who'd dealt with wolf problems themselves looked at the footage with different eyes. "I've seen barn cats go after coyotes before," one commenter wrote. "Never wolves, but cats are territorial as hell. If they bonded with the cattle, this could be legit." A wildlife biologist from the University of Montana reached out directly to Wade. Dr. Sarah Chen wanted to visit the ranch, observe the cat's behavior, understand what had happened. "Mr. Brennan, if what your video shows is accurate, this represents a fascinating example of interspecies protection behavior," she said over the phone. "Domestic cats forming coordinated defensive patterns to protect livestock from predators. It's unprecedented in the literature." Wade was hesitant about inviting outsiders to the ranch, but Eliza encouraged it. "If people can understand what actually happened, maybe they'll stop thinking I'm crazy." Dr. Chen arrived on April 3rd with a graduate student and observation equipment. She spent 3 days at the ranch, documenting the cats' behavior, their patrol patterns, and their interactions with the cattle. What she found surprised even her. "Your cats have established a sophisticated territorial system," she explained to Wade and Eliza on her final evening there. "The 8 barn cats function as perimeter guards, while the house cats serve as a mobile reserve force. They've divided the ranch into zones, with specific cats responsible for specific areas. When I tracked their movements over 72 hours, I found almost no overlap. Each cat knows its territory and patrols it consistently." "But why?" Eliza asked. "Why would they protect cattle?" "Several factors. First, this is their home, their territory. Defending it from predators is instinctive. Second, many of these cats came from traumatic backgrounds. You rescued them from situations where they had no control. Here, they have agency, purpose, safety. They're protecting what protects them." Dr. Chen pulled up photos on her tablet. "Look at this image. 3 cats sitting with a mother cow and her newborn calf. The cats aren't afraid of the cattle, and the cattle accept their presence. That's unusual bonding between species." "So what happened with the wolves wasn't a fluke?" Wade asked. "No, it was coordinated, intelligent, defensive behavior. Your cats assessed a threat, organized a response, and successfully defended their territory." She smiled. "Mr. Brennan, your wife's rescue cats are remarkable animals." Dr. Chen's preliminary findings were published in a veterinary behavior journal 2 weeks later. The article, titled "Coordinated Defensive Behavior in Domestic Cats: A Case Study from Montana," included Wade's video footage and detailed observations of the cat's territorial patterns. Suddenly, the Brennan Ranch cats weren't just local gossip. They were scientifically documented. The story was picked up by a regional news station in Billings. A reporter named Jessica Thornton drove out to interview Wade and Eliza, filming the cats as they went about their patrols. The segment aired on April 18th during the evening news. In Copper Ridge, Montana, a remarkable story of survival and unlikely heroes, Jessica's voiceover began, showing footage of the ranch. When wolves threatened Wade Brennan's cattle herd, salvation came from an unexpected source: 42 rescue cats belonging to his wife, Eliza. The segment showed interviews with Wade describing the wolf encounters, Eliza explaining her rescue work, and Dr. Chen providing scientific context. It ended with footage of the cats patrolling the pastures, overlaid with Jessica's conclusion. Sometimes the things we dismiss as crazy turn out to be exactly what we need. The segment went viral. Within days, it had been shared across social media platforms, picked up by national news outlets, and featured on morning shows. The Brennan Ranch cats became internet famous. Copper Ridge's reaction was complex. At Millie's Diner, the conversation had shifted noticeably. People who'd mocked Eliza for years now found themselves in the awkward position of having been proven wrong by science and national media attention. "I always thought there was something special about those cats," Margaret Peterson claimed, though everyone remembered her calling for animal control 9 months earlier. Derek Masterson was anyways more honest in his way. "I guess I misjudged the situation," he admitted to Wade when they crossed paths at the post office. "Those cats really saved your herd?" "They did," Wade confirmed. "Well," Derek cleared his throat uncomfortably. That's something." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than Wade expected to get. The attention brought unexpected opportunities. A cat food company contacted Eliza about sponsoring her rescue work. They wanted to feature the Brennan Ranch cats in an advertising campaign about the intelligence and value of rescue animals. "They're offering $20,000, Eliza told Wade, staring at the contract in disbelief. "Just to use photos and videos of our cats and tell our story." Wade pulled her into a hug. "That'll cover the property taxes and then some." A pet supply manufacturer offered to donate food, litter, and supplies for all 42 cats, everything Eliza needed to care for them properly. A veterinary pharmaceutical company offered free medications and vaccines for life. "People want to help," Eliza said, reading through emails from supporters across the country. "There are donations here from people who just want to contribute to the rescue work. Small amounts, but there are hundreds of them." The financial pressure that had been crushing them began to ease. Not eliminate the ranch still faced challenges, but Wade could breathe again. They weren't facing immediate disaster. More importantly, Eliza's dream of rebuilding her sanctuary became possible. The insurance payout from the Victorian fire came through in late April, $85,000. Combined with the sponsorship money and donations, she had enough to construct a proper rescue facility on ranch property. "We could build it near the barn," Wade suggested, looking at blueprints with a local contractor. "Purpose-built for cats, with proper climate control, medical areas, indoor and outdoor spaces. Everything you've wanted." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "After everything that's happened, after losing the Victorian and those 17 cats, I didn't think I'd get another chance." "You're getting more than another chance. You're getting resources to do it right." Construction began in May. Local contractors, who'd previously avoided working for the Brennans, suddenly found themselves eager to be part of the famous cat ranch. The sanctuary took shape quickly, a beautiful 2,000-square-foot facility designed specifically for rescue cat care. But the most significant change happened in Copper Ridge itself. People began stopping by the ranch, asking if they could see the famous cats. Wade and Eliza set up visiting hours on Saturday mornings, allowing small groups to tour the property and learn about the rescue work. Children were especially fascinated. They'd sit quietly while Eliza explained how each cat had been rescued, what made them special, how they'd learned to work together. Parents who'd once whispered about the crazy cat lady now watched their kids interact gently with the cats, learning about compassion and second chances. "This is what I always wanted," Eliza told Wade, after a particularly good visiting day. Not fame or attention, but for people to understand. These aren't just pets. They're survivors who learn to trust again, to find purpose again. In June, the Town Council of Copper Ridge did something unexpected. They issued a formal proclamation declaring June 15th Brennan Ranch Cats Day, recognizing the animal's role in protecting local agriculture and celebrating the importance of animal rescue work. Mayor Robert Chen, Dr. Sarah Chen's father, as it turned out, presented the proclamation personally. "We haven't always been welcoming to new ideas or different approaches," he said, standing in front of a small crowd at the ranch. Wade and Eliza Brennan showed us that sometimes what seems unusual is actually innovative. Their cats didn't just save their cattle, they reminded us, that every creature has value, and every person deserves to be judged by their character, not by gossip. It wasn't a full apology from the town, but it was acknowledgement, progress. The ranch hands noticed the change too. "People treat us different now when we're in town," Carlos said. "Used to be, they'd avoid us at the hardware store or the feed supply. Now they want to hear stories about the cats." Jimmy was more philosophical. "I've worked ranches my whole life, boss. Seen a lot of solutions to predator problems, fences, lights, guard dogs, even llamas. Never seen anything like what your wife's cats did. Made me realize I've been doing things one way because that's how they've always been done. Maybe there are other ways." The new sanctuary opened in July. It was perfect, spacious, clean, temperature-controlled, with both communal areas and private spaces for cats who needed solitude. Medical equipment, comfortable sleeping areas, and access to secure outdoor enclosures. Eliza could now house up to 50 cats comfortably, with proper quarantine facilities for new rescues. The original survivors from the Victorian fire were the first residents of the new facility, along with several new rescues from area shelters. "Look at them," Eliza said, watching the cats explore their new home. "Happy, safe, purposeful. This is what I dreamed of." Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You built something amazing. You always were going to, but now the whole world knows it." The ranch's finances stabilized through the summer. Cattle prices at auction were strong. The calving season had been successful, thanks to the cats' protection, and the various sponsorships and donations meant they were no longer operating on razor-thin margins. In August, Derek Masterson approached Wade at the feed store, a store Wade had returned to after Derek personally called to apologize and offer him the account terms his family had always received. "Wade, I wanted to say something," Derek began awkwardly. "What I did last year, making things difficult for you because of who you married, that was wrong. I let gossip and judgment cloud my business practices. Your family has been good to this town for 3 generations. You deserved better." Wade considered his response. Part of him wanted to hold on to the anger, the memory of struggling because people couldn't accept his choices. But he thought about Eliza, about how she'd faced worse judgment and still chose compassion. "I appreciate you saying that, Derek. It wasn't an easy year." "No, I imagine it wasn't." Derek shifted his weight. "For what it's worth, my daughter has been volunteering at your wife's sanctuary on Saturdays. She comes home talking about the cats, about Mrs. Brennan's work. She wants to be a veterinarian now. So, thank you for giving her something to aspire to." It was moments like these that showed Wade how much had changed. The town that had laughed at his wedding, that had whispered about the crazy cat lady, that had made their lives difficult, that town was learning. Not everyone changed their minds. Some people in Copper Ridge still thought the whole situation was bizarre, still believed that keeping 42 cats was excessive regardless of what they'd accomplished. But the hostility had faded, replaced by something closer to bemused acceptance. On their first wedding anniversary, June 28th, Wade and Eliza stood on their porch, watching the sunset. 22 cats were scattered around them, some sleeping, some grooming, some watching the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. When we got married, if someone had told me how this year would go, Eliza shook her head. The fire, the financial crisis, the wolves, and then all of this, the attention, the sanctuary, the change in how people see us. I wouldn't have believed any of it. Would you change anything? Wade asked. Eliza thought for a long moment. Not the marrying you part. That's the one thing I knew. Was right from the beginning. The rest, it was hard. Losing those cats in the fire still hurts. But maybe we had to go through all of it to get here. Wade pulled her close. The town laughed when I married you. Thought I'd lost my mind. And now? Now they're starting to understand what I knew all along. That you're remarkable. That your cats are remarkable. That sometimes the things people mock are the things that matter most. Oliver, Eliza's elderly asthmatic cat, who'd been with her for over a decade, climbed into Wade's lap. The cat who'd witnessed everything, the move to Copper Ridge, the marriage, the fire, the wolf defense, purred contentedly. You know what the best part is? Eliza asked. What's that? 25 more cats are alive now because of the new sanctuary. 25 cats who would have been euthanized in overcrowded shelters. They have homes, safety, a chance at good lives. That's what all of this was for. Wade kissed the top of her head. You saved them. Just like you saved me from a life without purpose. Beyond just maintaining the ranch, you gave all of us something bigger to work for. As darkness fell, the barn cats began their evening patrol. Wade could see them moving through the pastures, confident and purposeful. Guard dogs were common on ranches, even llamas or donkeys for predator control. But guard cats? That was innovation born from love, from Eliza's refusal to abandon creatures others had given up on. The Brennan Ranch had become famous for its cats, but Wade knew the real story was about something deeper. It was about a woman who'd been judged, dismissed, and mocked, who'd persevered anyway. About animals written off as worthless, who'd proven their value in the most dramatic way possible. About a community learning to question its assumptions. And it was about a marriage that had withstood everything the world threw at it, emerging stronger on the other side. The ranch that had been in Wade's family for 3 generations would continue for at least one more. Not just because of cattle prices or business decisions, but because 42 cats had shown up when it mattered most and reminded everyone that value comes in unexpected forms. Copper Ridge had laughed when the cowboy married the crazy cat lady. Nobody was laughing anymore. September 2020 brought the kind of clear, crisp mornings that made Montana ranching worth every hardship. Wade stood at the fence line, watching his cattle, now numbering 215, after a successful calving season, and felt something he hadn't experienced in over a year: genuine peace. The ranch was thriving. Cattle prices at the fall auction had been excellent, bringing in revenue that not only covered operating costs, but allowed Wade to reinvest in equipment and infrastructure. The sponsorship deals Eliza had secured continued providing steady supplemental income. For the first time since his father's death, the Brennan Ranch was financially stable with room for growth, but the changes extended far beyond balance sheets. A rancher from Wyoming named Tom Sullivan had called the previous week asking about the cat's wolf deterrent capabilities. I've got a pack hitting my calving pastures every spring. Lost 12 calves last year. If your cats could do for me what they did for you. Wade had to explain it wasn't that simple. These cats bonded with this specific property over time. They see it as their territory. You can't just transfer them somewhere else and expect the same behavior. But could I replicate what you did? Start my own cat program? That conversation had sparked something in Wade's mind. He mentioned it to Eliza over dinner. What if we developed a model? A way for other ranchers to incorporate rescue cats into their operations, not just as mousers, but as integrated members of the ranch ecosystem? Eliza's eyes lit up with that particular brightness that meant her mind was already racing ahead. A training program. We could work with ranchers who are willing to adopt rescue cats, teach them how to integrate the cats properly, create environments where the cats would naturally develop protective behaviors. You'd be saving cats and helping ranchers solve real problems, Wade added. Two purposes at once. Within a week, Eliza had drafted a proposal. She called it the Working Cats Ranch Program, a partnership between her sanctuary and ranches across Montana that needed both pest control and predator deterrence. Rescue cats who were too feral or independent for traditional adoption would find purpose on ranches, while ranchers would gain effective, low-cost solutions to common problems. Dr. Sarah Chen agreed to serve as scientific advisor, lending academic credibility to the program. The cat food sponsor enthusiastically backed the expansion, offering to supply participating ranches with food and supplies. By October, 5 ranches had signed up for the pilot program. Eliza carefully selected cats from overcrowded shelters, animals scheduled for euthanasia because they were deemed unadoptable due to their wild nature or lack of socialization. These were exactly the cats who might thrive in a ranch environment where independence was an asset rather than a liability. Wade watched Eliza transform into something beyond a rescuer. She became an educator, a consultant, a visionary building, something that could change how people thought about both animal rescue and ranch management. The first success story came from the Sullivan Ranch in Wyoming. Tom had adopted 6 semi-feral cats through Eliza's program in late October. By December, he reported a 90% reduction in rodent activity in his feed storage areas. More significantly, when wolves approached his property in January, the cats, though not as organized as the Brennan cats, still created enough disturbance and territorial marking to make the wolves uncomfortable. They're not soldiers like a town. Yours, Tom told Wade over the phone. But they're making a difference. My cows are calmer with them around, and the wolves haven't come close to the calving pastures. Word spread through the ranching community. By spring 2021, 32 ranches across 3 states had joined the Working Cats program. Eliza's sanctuary had placed over 200 cats, every one of them pulled from kill lists at overcrowded shelters. The impact on Copper Ridge was equally significant. The sanctuary needed staff as it expanded, creating jobs in a town where economic opportunities were limited. Eliza hired 3 full-time employees and several part-time volunteers, most of them local teenagers who learned animal care, business operations, and the value of second chances. Among them was Derek Masterson's daughter, Hannah. At 17, she'd become Eliza's most dedicated volunteer, arriving before school to help with morning feedings and spending every weekend at the sanctuary. Mrs. Brennan, Hannah, said one Saturday morning in March, I got accepted to Montana State pre-veterinary program. Eliza pulled the girl into a hug. Hannah, that's wonderful. I knew you would. I wrote my application essay about the cats here, about how watching you work showed me that veterinary medicine isn't just about treating sick animals. It's about understanding behavior, building relationships, seeing value where others don't. Hannah's voice grew emotional. You changed my life. A year and a half ago, I thought you were weird like everyone else did. Now you're the reason I know what I want to do with my future. After Hannah left, Eliza sat in the sanctuary office and cried not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. This was what she'd always wanted, to show people that the animals society discarded had worth, that compassion created ripples, extending far beyond the immediate act of rescue. Wade found her there, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by adoption paperwork and photos of cats who'd found homes through the Working Cats program. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. More right than I ever imagined it could be." She showed him the photos. This cat, Smokey, was going to be euthanized at a shelter in Billings. Now he lives on a ranch in North Dakota, keeping grain stores free of mice. This one, Patches, was found in a dumpster, starving. Now she's protecting sheep from coyotes on a ranch near Yellowstone. Every one of these cats was going to die, Wade. And now they're living, working, thriving. Wade understood. This was bigger than saving their ranch or proving the town wrong. Eliza had created a model that transformed how people saw both rescue animals and practical animal management. She'd turned her pain, the loss of 17 cats in the fire, into purpose that was saving hundreds more. The sanctuary itself had become a destination. Schools brought students for educational tours. 4-H groups came to learn about animal behavior and welfare. Even tourists passing through Copper Ridge would stop, having heard about the famous cat ranch. The revenue from tours, donations, and educational programs meant the sanctuary was self-sustaining. Eliza no longer had to choose between paying for cat food and covering household expenses. The sanctuary supported itself while doing meaningful work. In May 2021, nearly 2 years after their wedding, National Geographic contacted Wade and Eliza about featuring the ranch in a documentary about innovative animal-human partnerships. A film crew spent 2 weeks at the property, documenting daily operations, interviewing ranch hands about working with the cats, and capturing footage of the cats' patrol behaviors. The segment aired that fall as part of a series called Unlikely Alliances. 12 million people watched Wade and Eliza tell their story. The mockery, the fire, the wolves, the redemption. "We were judged by people who didn't know us," Eliza said to the camera. "They saw 42 cats and assumed mental illness or hoarding. They couldn't imagine that every single one of those cats was there for a reason, that each one had been saved from death or suffering. They couldn't see past their own assumptions." Wade added his perspective. "My wife was called crazy for caring about animals most people would have ignored. Turns out she wasn't crazy, she was ahead of her time. She saw value where no one else did. And that vision saved my ranch, created jobs in our community, and started a movement that's changing how ranchers and rescuers work together." The documentary brought another wave of attention. The Working Cats Ranch program expanded to 8 states. Major animal welfare organizations reached out about partnerships. Eliza was invited to speak at conferences about innovative animal rescue and the intersection of agriculture and animal welfare. "Remember when you told me people should mind their own business?" Eliza asked Wade one evening as they reviewed speaking invitations. "Now I'm being asked to tell everyone about our business." Wade laughed. "That's because our business turned out to be worth talking about." By late 2021, the Brennan Ranch bore little resemblance to the struggling operation it had been 2 years earlier. The facilities had been upgraded, the herd expanded strategically, and the land itself seemed healthier, better managed, more productive, alive with purpose. The cats numbered 35 now on the main ranch property. Some had transitioned to other ranches through the Working Cats program, replaced by new rescues who needed the specific environment the Brennan Ranch provided. The sanctuary housed an additional 40 cats in various stages of rehabilitation and placement. Jimmy, who'd been skeptical of the cats from the beginning, had become their most vocal advocate. "I worked ranches for 40 years before I came here," he told a journalist, interviewing him for an agriculture magazine. "Thought I'd seen every solution to every problem. These cats taught me you can't learn everything from experience. Sometimes innovation comes from unexpected places." Mrs. Brennan wasn't trained in ranching, didn't grow up in agriculture, but she brought something to this operation that no traditional rancher would have thought of. The respect in his voice was genuine. Jimmy had watched Eliza transform from the woman the town mocked into a respected figure in both animal rescue and agricultural circles. He'd seen her face crisis after crisis with quiet dignity, never lashing out at those who judged her, always focused on the work rather than the recognition. In December, Copper Ridge held its annual Christmas festival on Main Street. 2 years earlier, Wade and Eliza had attended alone, feeling the weight of the town's judgment with every step. This year was different. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan," Mayor Chen called out, waving them over to the main stage. "We have something for you." The crowd gathered several hundred people, including many who'd gossiped and whispered and made their lives difficult. Wade felt Eliza's hand tighten in his, her old anxiety surfacing. 2 years ago," the mayor began, "our town failed to see the value in something new and different. We judged without understanding, rejected without knowing. Wade and Eliza Brennan came to us with an unusual approach, 42 rescue cats living alongside traditional ranching operations. We laughed. We gossiped. We made their lives harder than they needed to be." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This was more direct acknowledgement than anyone expected, but they persevered. And in doing so, they showed us several important truths. First, that innovation often looks strange until it proves itself. Second, that compassion and practicality aren't opposites, they can work together to solve real problems. And third, that we should judge people by their character and actions, not by whether they fit our expectations. Mayor Chen held up a plaque. The town council voted unanimously to award Wade and Eliza Brennan the Copper Ridge Community Service Award for their contributions to our local economy, their educational outreach, and for reminding us that this town is better when we support each other rather than tear each other down. The applause was genuine, not polite obligation. People who'd avoided them at the grocery store now stood clapping. Margaret Peterson, who'd called for animal control on Eliza's first week in town, had tears in her eyes. Eliza stepped to the microphone, Wade beside her. "Thank you," she said simply. "When I moved to Copper Ridge, I was looking for a fresh start. I'd been judged in other places, called crazy for caring about animals others saw as disposable. I hoped this town would be different, but found the same attitudes here. Some people in the crowd looked down, ashamed, but something remarkable happened. When crisis came, and it came hard, this community watched as the animals you'd mocked proved their value in ways none of us predicted. You didn't just change your minds about the cats. You changed your minds about me, about Wade, about what's possible when we look past our assumptions." Her voice grew stronger. "Every cat at our sanctuary was rejected by someone. Abandoned, abused, scheduled for death because they weren't wanted. But we gave them another chance, and they gave us more than we ever imagined. Protection, purpose, and the foundation for a program that's now saving hundreds of animals across multiple states. That's what second chances can do. That's what happens when we see value instead of judgment." The applause this time was thunderous. Wade wrapped his arm around Eliza's waist as they left the stage, and he could feel her trembling not from fear anymore, but from emotion. "You okay?" he murmured. "I'm more than okay. I'm vindicated, and I'm grateful." She looked up at him. "When you stood up for me that first day, when everyone was saying I shouldn't have so many cats, you didn't know me. You just saw someone being treated unfairly and spoke up. That's when I started falling in love with you. Wade kissed her forehead. Best decision I ever made. That night, back at the ranch, they sat on the porch as they did most evenings. The temperature was below freezing, but they'd bundled in blankets, unwilling to miss their ritual of watching the land settle into darkness. The cats were visible in the moonlight, some patrolling, others lounging near the barn, a few sitting on fence posts like sentries. They'd become such an integrated part of the ranch operation that it was hard to remember a time before them. What do you think your grandfather would say? Eliza asked. About the cats? About how different the ranch is now? Wade considered it. He was a practical man, cared about results more than methods. I think he'd look at the herd, numbers, the financial stability, the expanded operation, and he'd say, "We're doing right by the land." He paused. My father would have been harder to convince. He was more traditional, less open to change. But even he would have respected what you've built. We've built, Eliza corrected. None of this works without you trusting me, supporting the rescue work even when it seemed impractical. You made it practical. That's your gift, seeing how compassion and effectiveness can coexist. Oliver emerged from the cat door, moving slowly. His arthritis was worse in cold weather. The old cat climbed carefully into Eliza's lap, settling with a contented sigh. He's been with me for 11 years now, Eliza said, gently stroking his fur. Through college, bad relationships, career changes, the move here, our wedding, the fire, everything. He's getting old. Wade heard the worry in her voice. Oliver was more than just a cat to Eliza. He was the one who'd started everything. The stray kitten, who'd awakened her passion for rescue work. He's had a good life because of you, Wade said. However much time he has left, he spent it loved and purposeful. That's more than most creatures get. They sat in comfortable silence. 3 beings sharing warmth against the cold, 2 humans who'd found each other against the odds, and 1 elderly cat who'd witnessed the journey from its beginning. The ranch stretched out before them, 800 acres of legacy and future intertwined. The Brennan family had worked this land for 3 generations, but it was this generation, Wade and Eliza together, that had transformed it into something more than just a cattle operation. It had become a sanctuary in the truest sense, a place where rejected animals found purpose, where innovative thinking merged with traditional values, where a community learned to look past surface judgments to see real value. And it had become a home, not just for cattle and cats, but for 2 people who'd been brave enough to build a life together, despite the mockery, despite the odds, despite everything that had tried to tear them apart. The town had laughed when the cowboy married the crazy cat lady. Now, the whole world was learning from what they'd built together. 3 years after their wedding, Wade Brennan stood in the main barn of what had become known simply as the Cat Ranch, watching his wife address a crowd of 50 ranchers who'd traveled from across the western United States to attend their first ever Working Cats Conference. Eliza commanded the room with quiet confidence, so different from the anxious woman who'd once hidden from town gossip. She wore practical ranch clothing, jeans, boots, a flannel shirt, but carried herself with the authority of someone who'd earned respect through results, not rhetoric. The question I hear most often, she said, gesturing to a slide showing success statistics, is whether this approach scales. Can what worked here work elsewhere? 3 years of Clue, data from 87 participating ranches gives us the answer, yes, but only when certain conditions are met. Wade smiled as she outlined the program's key principles. She developed this material through trial and error, learning which cats thrived in ranch environments, which ranchers made suitable partners, and how to set up both parties for success. The Working Cats Ranch program now had a waiting list of ranches wanting to participate and shelters desperate to place their most challenging animals. A rancher from Idaho raised his hand. What about liability? If one of these cats scratches a worker or causes some other problem? Excellent question, Eliza responded. We've partnered with an agricultural insurance company that's developed specific coverage for working cat programs. They've analyzed 3 years of incident reports and found that ranches with working cats actually have fewer workplace injuries overall, likely because reduced rodent populations mean fewer equipment malfunctions and disease transmission risks. The conference continued through the afternoon, covering everything from initial cat selection to integration protocols to long-term management strategies. Wade watched ranchers who'd arrived skeptical leave with adoption applications and implementation plans. During the afternoon break, an older rancher approached Wade directly. Name's Bill Hutchins. I run cattle in eastern Oregon. Lost my grandson 2 years back. He was only 19, killed in a car accident. The man's voice roughened. He loved animals, always bringing home strays despite my protests. Thought he was too soft for ranch work. Wade waited, sensing the man had more to say. Watching your wife talk about giving rejected animals purpose, about how caring for them doesn't make you weak. I wish I'd understood that when my grandson was alive. Wish I'd supported what he wanted instead of pushing him to be something harder, colder. Bill met Wade's eyes. I'm adopting 6 cats through your program. Gonna name them after him, his first name, middle name, nickname. Figure it's a way to honor who he actually was, not who I tried to make him be. After Bill walked away, Wade felt the full weight of what Eliza had created. This wasn't just about saving cats or protecting livestock anymore. It had become something deeper, a way for people to reconnect with compassion they'd buried, to find purpose in unexpected places, to honor what they'd lost by caring for what remained. That evening, after the conference attendees had departed, Wade found Eliza in the original barn where their 13 ranch cats still lived. She sat on a hay bale, surrounded by felines in various states of repose. Bill Hutchins told me his story, Wade said, settling beside her. The one about his grandson? I could barely hold it together when he told me during lunch. Eliza leaned against Wade's shoulder. Sometimes I forget this work is about more than just animals. It's about healing people, finding ways to express care in a world that often punishes gentleness. Rusty, the orange tabby who'd been one of the first barn cats, jumped onto Wade's lap despite being nearly 10 years old now. The cat had patrolled these buildings for over 3 years, had faced down wolves and coyotes, had raised 2 litters of kittens who'd gone to other ranches through the program. Dr. Chen called yesterday, Eliza continued. There's a professor at Cornell who wants to study our model for a book about human-animal working relationships. She thinks what we've done here represents a fundamental shift in how agriculture and animal welfare can intersect. Do you want to do it? More attention, more scrutiny? Eliza considered. A few years ago, I would have said no. I just wanted to be left alone with my cats. But now, if sharing our story helps more animals find homes and helps more ranchers solve problems sustainably, then yes, the attention serves a purpose. Wade marveled at her transformation. The woman who'd once flinched from judgment now actively sought platforms to spread her message. Crisis and vindication had forged something unbreakable in her. Jimmy appeared in the barn doorway, his weathered face creased in an unusual smile. Boss, you'll want to see this. Channel 7 News is here, something about a special feature. The news crew had arrived unannounced, part of a series revisiting viral stories to see where the subjects were now. Reporter Jessica Thornton, who'd done the original segment 3 years ago, greeted them warmly. The story of the Brennan Ranch cats was one of the most popular pieces I've ever done, Jessica explained as her cameraman set up. People still ask me about it. I wanted to come back and show them what's happened since. The interview covered everything: the expansion of the Working Cats program, the sanctuary's growth, the change in Copper Ridge's attitude, and the ripple effects spreading across multiple states. Jessica was particularly interested in the human impact stories like Bill Hutchins. "You've created something bigger than you probably realize," Jessica said as they concluded filming. "This isn't just a feel-good animal rescue story anymore. It's about community transformation, innovative thinking, and proving that compassion and practicality aren't opposites." After the crew departed, Wade and Eliza walked the fence line as sunset painted the mountains gold and purple. The herd grazed peacefully, and scattered among them, cats lounged or prowled, every one an animal that had been rejected, abandoned, or scheduled for death. "Sometimes I think about that day you defended me," Eliza said. "When the town was outside my house demanding I get rid of the cats, you didn't know me, had no reason to take my side. Why did you?" Wade had reflected on this question many times. "I recognized something. You were being judged for caring too much, for valuing things others dismissed. My whole life, I'd been told ranching was dying, that the old ways didn't matter, that staying on this land was backward thinking. I knew what it felt like to have people dismiss your passion as foolishness. And now? Now we've both proven that what others mock might be exactly what the world needs." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "The ranch is more profitable than it's been in 2 decades. We've created jobs. We've saved over 300 cats through direct placement and inspired dozens of other programs. We changed how an entire town thinks about animal welfare and innovation." Eliza touched his face gently. "We did it together. You gave me space to build something that seemed crazy. I gave you partnership when you were alone." A commotion near the barn drew their attention. Skip was running toward them, which at his age meant something significant had happened. "Boss? Mrs. Brennan!" He was breathless when he reached them. "It's Oliver. You should come." They ran to the house, where Oliver lay on his favorite bed near the fireplace, surrounded by several other cats. The elderly cat's breathing was labored, and even from the doorway, Wade could see this was the moment they'd been dreading. Eliza knelt beside Oliver, gathering him gently into her arms. The cat who'd started her rescue journey 11 years ago, who'd survived the Victorian fire, who'd witnessed everything, purred weakly as she stroked his head. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "Thank you for finding me in that dumpster all those years ago. Thank you for teaching me what rescue really means. Thank you for being the first." Wade knelt beside them, placing his hand on Eliza's back as she said goodbye to the cat who'd changed her life. The other cats seemed to understand, gathering closer, bearing witness to the passing of their elder. Oliver died peacefully in Eliza's arms as the last light faded from the windows. She held him for a long time afterward, tears streaming silently down her face, while the other cats pressed close in what seemed like collective mourning. They buried him the next morning on the ridge overlooking the ranch, beneath a young aspen tree. The entire ranch staff attended: Jimmy, Carlos, Skip, and the 3 sanctuary employees. Even some townspeople came, having heard the news and wanting to pay respects. "Oliver was just a kitten dying in a dumpster when I found him," Eliza said, standing over the small grave. "Society had literally thrown him away, but he lived 11 more years, years filled with love, purpose, and safety. He saw me through my darkest times, and he lived to see me happier than I'd ever imagined possible. Every cat we save now is saved in his honor, because he showed me that rejected creatures aren't broken, they're just waiting for someone to see their value." Margaret Peterson stepped forward hesitantly. Mrs. Brennan, I never apologized properly for how I treated you when you first arrived. I was cruel and judgmental. Watching what you've built, seeing how wrong I was, I'm sorry, truly sorry. Others echoed similar sentiments. The small funeral for one elderly cat became an unexpected moment of communal healing, years of tension finally releasing. That night, Wade held Eliza as she grieved. He had the best possible life because of you, he reminded her. And his legacy is hundreds of other cats who'll live because you didn't give up on him. I know. But knowing doesn't make it hurt less. No, Wade agreed. Love always hurts when it ends. That's how you know it mattered. In the weeks following Oliver's death, something shifted in Eliza. She'd always been dedicated to her rescue work, but now there was an added urgency, as if Oliver's passing had reminded her that time was finite and every moment counted. She expanded the sanctuary again, adding facilities to house elderly and special needs cats, the ones least likely to be adopted. She called it the Oliver Wing, and it became a hospice for cats who deserved comfort and dignity in their final months or years. Nobody throws them away here, she told a visiting journalist. Every life matters, from the first breath to the last. That's what Oliver taught me. The ranch continued thriving. Wade's herd had grown to 300 head, managed with sustainable practices that other ranchers were starting to emulate. The Working Cats program was featured in agricultural textbooks as an example of innovative problem solving. Universities were teaching case studies about the Brennan Ranch model. On their 4th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Eliza with a gift official designation of 200 acres on the ranch's northwest corner as the Brennan Hart Sanctuary Preserve, legally protected land dedicated permanently to animal rescue operations. Your sanctuary will outlive us both now, Wade explained as they stood on the preserved land. Whatever happens to the ranch in future generations, this space will always serve the purpose you created. Eliza couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the gesture's magnitude. Wade had just guaranteed that her life's work would continue long after she was gone. That evening, they sat on their porch as they had countless times before, watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed 3 generations of Brennan ranchers and would witness more to come. The cats were everywhere, patrolling, playing, resting. 35 on the main ranch now, 43 in the sanctuary. Every single one alive, because Eliza had refused to accept that being unwanted meant being worthless. Do you ever think about that day at the courthouse? Wade asked. When we got married and the town was outside laughing? Sometimes. But then I look at this. She gestured at the thriving operation surrounding them, and I realized their laughter was just noise. What matters is what we built despite it. No regrets? Only 17 cats died in the fire. Everything else, even the hardest parts, led us here. She took his hand. The town laughed when you married the crazy cat lady, but we weren't crazy, we were just ahead of the curve. Sometimes the things people mock become the things they eventually celebrate. A young cat, one of the recent rescues, bounded across the porch, full of the confidence that came from never knowing abandonment. Behind it, an older cat moved more slowly, its pace measured but purposeful. Different ages, different stories, but all finding the same thing: home. Wade pulled Eliza close, and they watched their kingdom settle into evening cattle bedding down, cats beginning their nightly patrols, the land itself seeming to breathe contentment. The Brennan Ranch had survived 4 generations, not by refusing to change, but by being brave enough to embrace the unexpected. A cowboy and a cat lady had shown an entire region that innovation often comes from unlikely places, that value exists where others see only problems, And that love for each other, for animals, for the land, could transform everything. The town had laughed. But laughter fades, while legacy endures. And on 800 Montana acres, surrounded by dozens of cats who'd learned to trust again, two people who'd found each other against all odds were building exactly that. A legacy of compassion, innovation, and the unshakable truth that sometimes the craziest ideas are actually the sanest ones. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.